Welcome back, Lemonsterites, to the February episode of Representing Leominster. I am your State Representative, Natalie Higgins, thrilled to be joined with my partner in the Twin Cities, Rep. Kushmerek from the 3rd Worcester District.
Natalie, thanks so much for having me on the show.
Thanks for being on. I kicked off the year with Senator Cronin, and it only made sense to have you as my next guest since we do so much work together. We're really using these shows as an update of a new session is upon us. We're getting going, kind of like helping constituents understand how they can plug in and kind of how a new session starts.
Senator Cronin and I have a competitive rivalry with our shows as well on public access. So I'll endeavor to be a better guest than John was for you last month.
Yeah. Well, how is your new session going? What are you excited about? Like, is there anything new you're working on this session?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, I think each session, you almost feel like you're starting over anew, and for better or worse. There's some bills you almost get across the finish line that I felt like I was so close, and if we had another 3 weeks, could have gotten it done. But other bills where you feel like I didn't move it as much as I wanted to, and so I'm excited that this is the reset button, and you really get to reprioritize some of your legislation. And so there's certainly some bills, particularly around the apprenticeship and workforce angle, that I'm really excited to tackle. But the one that I'm most excited about is actually what I'll be working on with you in the session ahead around childcare.
My favorite bills come from constituents, and this came from one of your constituents and one of my constituents, and really trying to look at one of the many ways that we can tackle childcare issues. And what about folks who are renters who want to provide home-based childcare in their apartment, and they have a large enough space to be able to do that, but they might need a little more help or a little more agenda setting with their landlord to make sure that they can offer that service.
Well, and the ecosystem of childcare is just so challenging right now. The pandemic really wreaked havoc on the entire childcare industry around the nation. And in many ways, Massachusetts has rebounded better than nearly every other state in the country. As a result, we have more than 7,700 providers in open available childcare slots beyond where we were pre-pandemic. That's fantastic. But the reality is the need has also grown with that availability. And so, what that means, you and I know it all too well, we hear constantly from constituents who feel like their options are either I get my child into an available slot that's somewhat close and somewhat affordable, or me or my partner are going to have to pull back from the workforce.
Right.
And so we hear from workforce all the time, they need more workers. We hear from parents that they need access to childcare. And I think this is a really unique angle that we've looked at of how to tap into these underutilized licensed childcare providers who really feel like owning a business off-site from their home is not really an option.
Yeah, and I think it's just like such an opportunity for families, especially who don't have access to like robust public transportation like other parts of the state, to really be able to like drop your kiddo off in your apartment building and then head to work.
That's right. Well, and the reality is we're talking about, a single child care provider who lives on site, who's already there. You're talking about really a license allows you to have no more than, I believe, 5 children on site at any time, and it depends by age range.
Yep.
But you're really talking 5 children. And traditionally, there's been 2 major barriers that we hear. One is from municipalities saying, well, you're not properly zoned for pickup and drop-off spots. We're talking about 5 children, at most 5 vehicles dropping off in the morning for what is, in my case, in the morning, my drop-off is less than 30 seconds. And you're talking about a 30-second pickup in the afternoon. And often you have more than one child coming from the same family. So the reality is we're probably looking at 3 or 4 cars. So the zoning pickup and drop-off should not be a major hurdle. And so really preventing municipalities across the board from restricting access based on just zoning restrictions alone, I think will be a major help. And then certainly the second piece of allowing by right and ensuring that property owners aren't restricting their tenants' ability to do this. There's really, in my mind, property owners can't restrict if you were to have four children of your own in your house, where they could be there for 24 hours a day. Yet we're restricting the ability to have 4 children in 4 or 5 children in a home for 8 hours a day, often while the other tenants or other people in the property are out at work or off-site.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Often we talk about like these initial bill filings as a conversation starter, figuring out like who's interested in the issue, who's going to come out with questions or concerns or support. And I'm really excited to be able to work on this and kind of continue on some of the successes we've had with the Green Act, which is a bill that we teamed up representing Twin Gateway cities to figure out how do we incentivize and help single families who own a single family home or a small landlord decarbonize their home, upgrade their homes so that we can reduce the utility costs. And I know in Fitchburg, more than any other community, like your utility costs are just like really, really unbearable.
And it's refreshing to hear the entirety of the state talking about this issue, because all too often it feels like, in Fitchburg and Lunenburg, Ashby and Townsend, the 4 major Unitil municipalities that have both natural gas and electric service, I feel like we've been screaming into the wind for a long time, talking about the dramatic rise in rates that ratepayers are paying. And now I think we have almost everybody universally across the board, unless you're in a municipal energy area. Everybody's really angry, and they should be, and really outraged at what we see as predatory rate hikes. And so it's unfortunate for all of those families and ratepayers that have been affected. But again, refreshing for me to know that, all right, now we have another 75% of the state as an ally here and really looking to tackle some of these rate increase issues. But to your point of realizing what's in our immediate control here before the legislature is the ability to increase and enhance infrastructure and support for green infrastructure that will lessen carbon footprint, but decrease the costs to whether it's renters or owners alike.
Yeah, I didn't realize, and I should have realized, right? Gateway cities have some of the oldest housing infrastructure and the most expensive utility bills. And so if we can figure out a way to incentivize some of those transitions to lower cost and cost savings, it wins for everyone.
And I like, the opportunity to work alongside you. And I think that partnership started in my first week in office when I first took office. And I was thrilled to partner with you. But then also, Charlie Baker at the time puts out a number of proposals around decarbonization efforts and energy efficiency that perfectly dovetailed with our legislation. And in some cases, we found that the Baker administration and then later the Healy administration are both supporting and funding efforts through regulatory means, the same legislation that we're filing.
It's been really cool to see those pilots like roll out and get to even connect with folks who are taking advantage of it and seeing their utility bills get completely wiped out, and just how much more stability that's giving them.
That's right. And the reality is, as we look to reduce our carbon footprint and reduce the consumption on fossil fuels, there's only so many places that we can go beyond where we have. And unless we can tackle, multifamily dwellings in Massachusetts, predominantly in those gateway communities, we're never going to not only meet our goals, but we're never going to lessen our dependence on fossil fuels. And the more we lessen that dependence, the more availability there will be for other ratepayers too. So that should help not just with the homeowners and the renters and the property owners of these individually affected units, but in theory, that should lower energy costs as well across the board.
Yeah. So we're filming on February 24th, and tomorrow, Tuesday, we're actually going to be heading into the House to take up our rules debate. We need to pass our rules in order to kind of get committees going, get bills over to committee, and really get work done in this session. We had a somewhat unusual start where we had to get a supplemental budget done before we could even get our rules figured out, but one of my
exciting than
sessions
talking
has
about
been
the minutia of rules, right?
I was gonna say, no, one of my sessions has been predictable. When we had Senator Cronin on last month, we were like, we're going to have rules done and we'll have committees by the time you see me next month. And so this is an example of like, no matter how you think the legislature might work, there's always like a fun new rule you learn about. And this one was one that I didn't even know, that we take turns doing the rules. So the Senate will do the rules first this time. Next time we'll go first. I think COVID added a little bit of confusion into that, that process. But I'm really excited to get committee work going. Something that I've always taken for granted is every single bill, even citizen petitions, get a public hearing in Massachusetts, something that we're keeping, which is really incredibly important because so many Leominster residents have partaken in this, is the hybrid meetings. So the ability to, you don't have to go all the way into the State House, pay for parking, pay for travel, take the whole day off. You can actually zoom in and make your voice heard. And so I'm hoping that more and more folks will be able to share their stories through these hybrid hearings.
I mean, that's exactly it. It's, I think it's been a game changer for public participation, and to see folks that otherwise, we're forced of taking a day off from work or spending a tremendous amount of money and time to get to the State House, or just choosing to stay silent on an issue, and that's not the point of participatory government, right? And so it's been really refreshing just to hear new voices and new folks testifying on bills and taking up passions and really expressing those passions. You know, it's we are one of the few states that mandate that all bills filed in a timely fashion get a hearing, and just the more I talk to colleagues from beyond our own borders, you know, you really get a sense of what a rarity it is. And you go to New Hampshire, and that is not the case. And there's only a handful of bills that get heard and receive time and attention. Other states have time limits, so you could drive 4 hours to be at the State House, waiting in line to testify on a bill. The time limit goes off, and they move on to the next bill. And your time and effort were wasted, and your voice didn't count. And in Massachusetts, you know, 7,100 bills received hearings last session. It's pretty incredible, right?
Yeah. As the Vice Chair of Public Service, and you serve on public service, we hear a lot of bills, and there are some committees that definitely are pulling a heavier weight than others.
Between mental health and public service last session, I think that was 700 bills before mental health, and 800 or 900 in front of public service.
Yeah, and then I also have had the opportunity for the last 2 sessions to serve on children, families, and persons with disabilities, and then Ways and Means, and so like the hearing time adds up. The hearings are one of the best pieces, and we'll know in a couple of weeks kind of what committees we're serving on, but it really is, especially being on Ways and Means, the ability to go across the Commonwealth and hear about like the commonality and the differences, but like how much commonality, no matter what county you're in, given the topics and how to come together. It's a hard feat to get 200 of us to come to agreement. And some of the best legislation comes out of those really tough conversations about learning from kind of all the different angles.
Yeah, I had the chance to serve as vice chair this last session on tourism, arts, and cultural development. And something that's, I think, really near and dear to Fitchburg and North Central, and just really core to who we are as a destination of tourism. And certainly, you know, we minimize it in Fitchburg, but the Johnny Apple seat is a big deal to the rest of the state, and a major driver of tourism in the fall. It's a chance we get to really brag around the rest of the state about what our region has. But in my role, I got to travel around to so many other districts in every corner of the state and really get a view through their lens of what's most important, whether it's tourism, arts, and cultural development. And you know, for some, we find ourselves on farms, you know, talking about agro-tourism. Certainly we know it here, but for others that means something completely different in, say, cranberry bogs, you know, down by the Cape. And you get a sense of really different museums and cultural icons that perhaps we take for granted being in Massachusetts and home to the American Revolution as well.
Well, and I think it's what a great opportunity to have you having served on that committee because of Fitchburg's Renaissance and focus on art and the community and housing and how all of that like intertwines with the university, right? Like there's so much interesting work happening.
You really get to see the interconnectedness of all of these issues, and at face value, tourism, arts, and cultural development might not really sound like the hot button issue of the Commonwealth, but it really is at the intersection of transportation, of housing, of food security and food systems around the Commonwealth, and tourism is the kind of the fun part that brings all these issues to the fore.
One of the questions that I often ask folks is like, do you have any advice for someone who's looking to get more involved on an issue that they care about at the state level or the local level? Like, what advice do you have for them to make their voice heard in a better way?
First, I always recommend pick up the phone or send an email. We get a lot of emails, so I always prefer the phone call or the request for a face-to-face meeting to really sit down and chat with a constituent. Earlier you talked about the best bills that we have, and the ones that we don't even necessarily think about filing are the ones that come from constituents when they sit down and they talk to us about an issue and they say, I would love to see a piece of legislation that does that. You're like, that might be so simple, that could work as a solution. And more often than not, I find I've already fully committed to my legislative agenda. I'm like, I'm not going to file another bill. And then somebody will sit down and say, I have this great idea, I think. What do you think?
Yeah.
And the next thing I know, I'm filing a bill, and we're really getting traction. And so not only do I have a fun from meeting with constituents in that way, I often find that if we're not the answer or the avenue for them, we can direct them elsewhere. And so often somebody will come to me with an issue that really intersects more with a municipality. Okay, well, I can talk to you about the laws, or I can talk to you about some statewide efforts that we're working on, or regulation behind it, but I'd be happy to introduce you to the local board or commission, or to the mayor, or to a select board member in Lunenburg, and really start to direct people accordingly at the most local level of we can go two ways. We can go top down or bottom up, and that's the fun part of our offices. We serve at that intersection between federal and local.
I often joke that we are the switchboard operators of government, right? Like we know, we might not hold the resources ourselves, but we know how to get you to the right place the quickest way possible. And that's why I'm always encouraging folks to reach out to us early if you're facing a challenge and you're not sure what level of government. We usually can figure out and make that warm referral off.
Oh, I think more than 50% of the calls we get to our office aren't necessarily a function of our office. And to your exact point, it is kind of just switchboard and triage of what immediate need can we help you with as we're talking, and then how do I get you most quickly to the person that can actually solve the solution or get at the heart of the issue.
Yeah, and I take this opportunity to highlight, if you were having an issue with a state agency, we have been getting more and more calls around unemployment. Do not sit on hold. Please give us a call if you're having trouble with your SNAP recertification or your Mass Health recertification. We often can help get you an answer a whole lot more quickly, and would be glad to do that.
It is nothing more frustrating than hearing a constituent say, I've been waiting for 4 months, and I sat on hold for 5 hours yesterday, and I wish a month in or 2 weeks in, you had picked up the phone and called, because usually we can resolve those issues in a fraction of the time. And those are things we enjoy doing. We don't always want government to work that way, that it has to go through our offices, but we don't want our constituents waiting longer than they have to. And if they're not sure about the process, that's okay to ask us. Either we know and we'll walk them through it, or we'll find out along with them. And I often find that's educational for me too. Sometimes I haven't walked through a process and it's new for me.
And we need to know if a system's broken, right? Like if we're not getting the calls and folks are struggling, there's no way that we can fix kind of that intake system.
Well, and to your point around unemployment, after a few weeks of getting calls saying it's been weeks or a month, or I was on hold, or I can't get a return phone call, being able to escalate that to the governor's office and to the secretary's office, saying, I think we have an issue, do we need to chat about as we approach budget season, getting you proper staffing and funding and resources. But if constituents aren't sharing that with us, then we can't share it with the governor and with our colleagues to really address it in a meaningful way.
Yeah. I know we have a few minutes left, and you mentioned something at the start of the episode, apprenticeship and vocational training.
Yeah.
And it's something that's near and dear to both of our communities'
right.
hearts. And for folks who don't remember, my first day, Taylor left my office and broke my heart a little, but she became an apprentice in the Carpenters Union.
That's right.
And found this work that she really loved and just didn't fully understand kind of how an apprenticeship would work, the ability to get paid while she's getting real training, and have that wraparound support to take on a new industry.
You know, it's a real shame. I think the state is often just trying to plead employers to consider offering apprenticeships, but yet we in turn as a state don't require it when we do these massive construction projects. And so you're absolutely right. If whether you're a residential homeowner or a renter or you own a large business, finding a welder, a carpenter, an electrician, or plumber, incredibly challenging right now. And even if you find them, you'll notice the rates are often exorbitant that you're paying. And it's just based on the fact that we don't have enough skilled trades men and women in the Commonwealth doing these jobs. And it's not for lack of desire, but it is a requirement that in order to hit these level of journeyman or master in your level, that you have an opportunity to apprentice under somebody that's licensed and certified to be doing that work. And so really looking at this challenge of, all right, how do we better engage with employers and incentivize them to create apprenticeships? But then also as a Commonwealth, when we embark on these 10 or 100 million or billion dollar infrastructure projects or housing projects around the state, how do we require that this is a part of everything that we do? And I'm obviously I was born and raised in a union carpenter household. I married into a laborer household. That's a point of contention between the two families. But I firmly believe in unions. But apprenticeship doesn't have to be union either. So non-union shops can still offer a statewide apprenticeship, where what you're doing is you're going to bring somebody in who's been trained up to a point. They're ready to be on a job site, but they need to be supervised to make sure that the quality of work is good and that they continue learning in their growth and development, and hit the point where they're ready to soon be a master level in their field. And so worked on this as part of the housing bill, and we got it so close. We got it into conference committee. We got it into the last hour of negotiation as a requirement, and rightfully so. A couple of organizations came forward and said, actually, we've still got a few questions that we don't feel is answered. And what can be so painful as the legislative process, that it takes forever to get something done. You can't pass a law that has unintended consequences that you're not aware of, and if there's still questions that aren't answered. You've got to pull back from that piece of the legislation. And so we did. And so I think we're now in a place where we've answered some of those questions, refiled a standalone bill outside of just the housing component. And so really excited to be partnering with the AFL-CIO and the Carpenters Union and continue on with these conversations.
I think that's the coolest, when bills get to come back and be reiterative and actually get better and stronger and maybe impact a whole lot more than the original bill was seeking to impact.
That's exactly, and I've learned a ton in exchange too, because organizations and private businesses came back and said, well, what about this? And how about that? Would it impact me here? And would it be triggered at this threshold? And so we really got to sit down with all of the stakeholders and say, all right, let's find a meaningful and holistic way to address challenges to workforce development and really look long-term at how we grow and develop a whole new generation of skilled laborers and skilled craftsmen for the next generation, because it impacts each and every one of us, regardless of what age range or socioeconomic path we're in.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for giving us some insight into the things that you're working on. I'm really excited to see these bills move forward. Thank you to everyone who tuned into this episode. We'll see you next month. And I hope you all stay safe as this ice continues to melt. Take care, everyone.